Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Casey Given. I am the President and Executive Director of Young Voices. For those of you unfamiliar, Young Voices is a nonprofit PR agency that helps young professionals passionate about free markets and individual liberty get into the media and build career paths in public policy. If that sounds like that might apply to you, please come find me afterwards and would love to chat. Our website is joinyv.org. And we are great. It's so great to be here live in New York City for what is our 11th Young Voices debate. We started this debate series last fall, which was an idea pitched to me by a young man you're about to meet, our moderator, in just a minute here. And it's been a great experience. We've had nearly full audiences for every single one we've done live here in New York City, as well as a great online audience. And I'm sure we have many people tuning in right now, and we'll even be fielding questions from them. So it's a great hybrid experience, and wonderful to have civil discourse, which I feel like is needed now more than ever before on important issues of our day. And boy, this topic tonight I feel like is really the most pressing, at least here in New York City. Very exciting to talk about the mayoral candidacy of Zohran Mamdani. So without further ado, I will introduce our our moderator and the director of Young Voices debates, Hekmat Abukadr. Hekmat comes to us with experience from the United Nations Department of Peace and Political Affairs at the Quincy Institute. Hekmat has a BA from Boston College and is currently pursuing a graduate degree in public policy at Yale. Please welcome our moderator for the evening, Hekmat Abukadr.
Thank you all for being here. Oh, that's my fiance, Margarita. Thank you, Margarita, for helping with the slides. Gene, focus on me. Try to focus on me. So, welcome, folks. Thanks again. This is our 11th debate. Next season, we'll have our 12th. We will wrap it up for the year. It's been an amazing journey. The idea behind this debate society is to bring young voices that are rarely represented in the topics and the discussions that matter most to them, to our generation. So with that, we brought two young voices who are idyllic and are exemplary to have this conversation, this important pressing debate. And our debate at hand today is the following resolution. New York mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani's political program is radical by mainstream measure. And to have this debate, we will be following an Oxford style. The Oxford style is as follows: 10-minute opening statements from both debaters, 5-minute rebuttals. And during these opening statements, right before the opening statements, we will ask you all to cast your vote whether you agree, you disagree, or are undecided on the resolution at hand. Then we have the opening statements, the rebuttals, and then we have 40 minutes of questions and answers. So prepare yourself to ask one of our debaters a question about the topic at hand, and then we'll hear 5-minute closing remarks from each side. Once that's concluded, you will get to vote once more, and the side that switches more votes to their corner is the side that is declared an Oxford-style winner in our debate society. So without further ado, let me introduce our two debaters. First, for the proposition, arguing the proposition, we have Daniel Idfren. Daniel Idfren is a contributor with Young Voices, whose work focuses on urban policy, criminal justice reform, and the future of American cities. He has written extensively on New York politics and culture with bylines in the New York Post, Newsweek, The Free Press, Reason, Real Clear Politics, and Real Clear Politics. Daniel brings a sharp libertarian perspective to questions of governance and urban development. Daniel, please come to the stage. And I would ask my fiance to please switch the slide. Excellent. And now, as I introduce the opposition debater, I invite you all to whip out your phones and scan this QR code and make your voice heard, whether you agree, you disagree, or are undecided on the resolution at hand, which again reads, New York mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani's political program is radical by mainstream measure. As you do so, the debater for the opposition, Alex Pelletieri. Alex is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America and a volunteer on Zohran Mamdani's mayoral campaign. He previously served as a political campaign manager and organizer in DSA's student election section and recently completed a term on DSA's National Political Committee. He is a native New Yorker, holds a BA from Hunter College, and has written about electoral politics for socialist publications such as The Call and The Activist. Alex, please come to the stage. And now let me get a quick gauge from the audience to see if anyone is still trying to vote. Please raise your hand if you're still trying to figure it out. Okay, we can buffer, we can fluff until you get there. And give me a thumbs up when you figured it out. Yeah, you got it? Excellent. Anyone else still trying to vote? Excellent, excellent. With that, I'll ask my lovely fiance to switch sides with me, switch seats, and another round of applause for your excellent skills. All right, can you hear me? All right. With this, let us take it away. Daniel, your 10-minute opening remarks. Please take the stage, the podium.
Good evening. First, I want to thank Young Voices for giving me a guilt-free reason to skip class today. And then thank you for those who are watching who decided to take time out of your day to watch a college student talk about the mayoral race. I'm no expert, I'm no historian, but I'm only an aspiring political commentator and writer. But most of all, I'm a discerning observer. Zohran Mamdani has ran a great campaign. His videos are generally fun to watch and they're innovative when it comes to production. He's garnered national, if not international attention, and he has an anti-establishment air that gives us like new life, some new breath, not only for New Yorkers, but for all Americans who are disgruntled with our leaders in different cities and federally in Washington, D.C. Now, he's also addressing a mainstream concern, which is affordability. But ultimately, the proposition is whether Mr. Mamdani, his political platform is radical by mainstream measure. And I'm proposing that it is. First, I want to talk about the demographic mismatch I see between the campaign messaging that Zohran purports and what I've seen, at least in the statistics and in my personal experience. Because if you wish to know a campaign's heart or what a campaign truly intend to serve, you have to look at the heart of its campaign. And so, first off, when looking at the primary data, high-income New Yorkers voted for Mamdani by 12 points compared to lower-income New Yorkers who voted for Cuomo by 10 points. The Common Corridor, that as is colloquially known as, it's a collection of neighborhoods with those who are more ideologically driven, went the most from Mamdani. That includes Bushwick, that's 57 points from Mamdani. That's Greenpoint, also 57 points. East Williamsburg, 65 points. Fort Greene, where I went to high school, that went to Mamdani by 38 points. And Bed-Stuy, actually, where I was born and raised, and I can personally attest to its shift over the course of my life, has went to Mamdani by 43 points. Now, it's not only the Common Corridor as is colloquially understood, but you have to think about the turnout in those neighborhoods compared to other neighborhoods as well, right? So I take the example of Flatbush and East Flatbush. So Flatbush has been a bit more gentrified over the past 10 years with newer New Yorkers versus East Flatbush, which is more African-American dominated. East Flatbush went to Cuomo by, I believe, 37 points, while Flatbush went to Mamdani by 16 points. And in Flatbush, 5,000 more voters voted for Mamdani. And so a simple truism is actually just reflected within a primary, and is that more ideologically driven voters tend to come out during primaries to support their candidate. Now, I want to talk about some of his campaign promises, his platform. Let's first talk about housing. So, in New York City, about half, I believe, of the apartments are rent stabilized, which is essentially a 50+1 scenario for Mamdani. So in strictly democratic terms, yes, it is democratic, but despite the passions of those who will obviously vote in their best interest to freeze the rent for 4 years, we are bounded by economic law. So freezing the rent is a violation of those laws, which is really human incentive, and New Yorkers will pay the price after the fact. First, we know that housing quality will deteriorate as homeowners, they will lose, their net profit will dwindle, and they'll have less money to allocate towards fixing the properties that tenants live in. We know that there's a welfare misallocation problem because rent-stabilized apartments are not means tested. We know that there's also going to be a spillover demand over the long run rather than the short run. Because these apartments will be rent stabilized, there'll be a greater incentive for people to find those apartments. But we know that the vacancy rate for rent stabilized apartments are about 1%, and that demand for the rent stabilized apartments will spill over to unregulated apartments, which will ultimately hurt newcomers, young professionals, and those who those who are not necessarily not necessarily locked in with stabilized apartments, because we know that tenants in rent stabilized apartments have near perpetual tenancy rights, even generational if you play your cards right with the leases. The second thing I want to talk about is the fare-free busing that Zohran talks about. Fare-free busing is a no-brainer. It's one of those topics where it's a why not sort of scenario, which inflames the passions of those and the wants of New Yorkers to get the fare-free busing. But again, that's not necessarily political moderation, especially when you look at the financial outlook of the MTA. The MTA last year lost $1 billion in revenue loss, most of that being from fare evasion, particularly with busing. We know that in a letter. Sent to City Council in 2023 that the MTA would be losing $650 million in annual revenue if we decided to have fare-free busing. We have an example of Kansas City. They had a fare-free busing program during COVID. They recently ended that program because they ran out of money. And New York is in the same boat. Like we rely on federal funding to help out with the egregious financial outlook of the MTA. And if that financial assistance isn't renewed, we could look at multi-billion-dollar budgets by fiscal year 2028. And so, again, fare-free busing is a great thing. Nobody's really against fare-free busing by principle, but again, it crashes into the reality that is the financial outlook of the MTA and the city. I also wanted to talk about city-owned grocery stores. Everyone hates being scammed, and when you cast grocery store owners as the villain who are price gouging, then the solution becomes obvious, having an alternative by the government that is supposed to serve your best interest to ensure that doesn't happen. The only problem is that Kansas City already tried it as well. They had a supermarket that ate up $18 million in taxpayer dollars, and customer traffic fell from 14,000 per week to just 4,000 per week. It lost almost $1 million last year. So, it almost lost $1 million last year. And so, some may say that New York is different. New York is a bigger city with more resources, but I would submit to you that the problem isn't how big the city is or the municipality is rather government. Government is an independent variable here that doesn't allow, again, city-owned grocery stores to work. So with all three of those contentions, I believe that those three contentions make Mamdani's political platform radical compared to mainstream measure. There are definitely components of Mamdani's platform that I believe are mainstream. For example, him having a phone line and giving an avenue for small businesses to navigate the vast sea of regulations in the city. I believe that's a good idea. I believe his zoning plans to build more housing in the city is another phenomenal idea. But ultimately, when we're looking at the financial realities of the city, of the MT and the different bureaucracies that we're looking at, and we take a step back and we don't define mainstream by 50+1, democracy is everything, but rather take a holistic, discerning view, I believe those three, his housing policy, city-owned grocery stores, and fare-free busing, without a doubt, makes him radical compared to mainstream measure. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Alex, please take it away for your 10 minutes.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I just want to share that at about 10 o'clock last night, I received a phone call from a good friend of mine, Ross Barkin, who's an excellent journalist, who was originally supposed to debate my side today but could not make it, and he asked me to fill in, which I was very honored to do. But I did just want to plug Ross, and I would absolutely recommend that everybody check out his really amazing writing on New York politics and culture, and Zohran as well. But to really answer the question that is posed in front of us, we have to ask ourselves another question. And that is, do we believe that a better world is possible? Libertarians and Republicans and many Democrats will tell you that it's not. But Zohran and the DSA have proven that a better world is possible if we are willing to fight for it. New York is the richest city and the richest country in the history of the world. But Zohran's ideas will not change that. What they will do is spread around the wealth more ethically and more efficiently. So let's do a deep dive of Zohran's ideas. Fast and free buses. We can talk about examples in other cities like Boston or Washington, D.C., or Kansas, as Daniel already mentioned, but to look for an example of fast and free buses working, we don't need to leave New York City. In fact, we don't even need to leave Manhattan. When Zohran was a state assembly member, he spearheaded a program where each borough got one free bus line, which increased ridership and decreased the tax on bus operators. For housing, Zohran, or any mayor, appoints the Rent Guidelines Board. The Rent Guidelines Board sent the rent for 2 million rent-stabilized tenants across New York City. So Zohran can appoint people to this board who believe that housing is a human right, who believe that landlords do not need more income, and through that, he can freeze the rent for 2 million tenants. Bill de Blasio, who is by no means a communist, by no means a democratic socialist, somebody who Karl Marx would be ashamed to be associated with. Bill de Blasio did this not once, not twice, but 3 times over his 8 years as New York City mayor. Universal child care. Let's join countries like Romania and Austria that have a higher population than New York to offer free universal child care for all who want it. And let's use the common sense approach of using city-owned spaces to lower the cost. And finally, safe streets. What is so radical about having a mental health worker respond to somebody who is having a mental health crisis? What is radical about using vacant storefronts for resources for people in need? But the question before us is not one about economics, it's not one about policy, it is a question of politics. Because Zohran's opponents want us to believe that this is as good as it gets. They want us to accept what crumbs we have and be thankful that it isn't worse. But New York City is the greatest city in the world. People come from all over the world to live here, to start their businesses here, to raise their families here. But then why is it like that cities like Albuquerque, New Mexico have a Department of Community Safety, but we don't? Why is it that Atlanta is going to have a government-run grocery stores, but we don't? Why is it that Romania can have universal child care, but we can't? Our government already pays for our schools, for our libraries, and for our parks. Is it really so radical that they pay for buses and childcares and groceries too? If the idea that our tax dollars can work for us, cannot go to billionaires, cannot fund a genocide, but can fund affordable housing, universal childcare, and affordable groceries, if that is truly a radical idea, then we are no longer deserving of the title of the greatest city in the world. Then we might as well just go home. But Zohran will not win these political demands alone. He will, and will continue to, build a movement around them. Zohran started off his campaign at 1% in the polls. But through knocking on millions of doors, through raising of millions of dollars, Zohran finished with 56% of the vote after the ranked choice voting was calculated. So if Zohran was truly radical, how did he ascend from a 1% to 56%? How did he win a majority, over 50%, in places like Washington Heights, like Elmhurst, Queens, like Dyker Heights, where I grew up, and that voted for Trump in 2024? How did he win a plurality, the most votes, in places like Harlem or Flushing or the North Shore of Staten Island? So what is more likely? That 470,000 New Yorkers voted for an unpragmatic, radical person, or that Zohran won because he built a movement around pragmatic and common sense ideas? Throughout history, many people have called the women's suffrage movement radical. They called legalizing gay marriage radical. They called labor unions radical. They called Social Security radical. But they were all proven wrong because people fought and people organized and people built movements that showed that these were not radical ideas, but necessary for a functioning society. And Zohran is building a movement that will do the same. My opponent tonight will spend a lot of time telling you that a better world isn't possible. But if people in the labor movement, or the suffrage movement, or the gay rights movement listened to arguments like that, where would we be today? As Zohran says, everything is impossible until it's done. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Alex. Daniel, with that, you have 5 minutes for your rebuttal.
I don't necessarily believe that I'm, by proposing that Zohran Mamdani's political platform is radical compared to mainstream measure. I'm not necessarily advocating that we can have a better New York City or a better world, but when discerning the different policies, the amount of money it will take, and the current financial outlook of the city, a lot of it is unfeasible, whether it be that many of its policies have to go through Albany, or that the price tags are really high, and that even though New York City is the richest city in the richest country in the world, the financial outlook isn't necessarily sunshine and roses, as is politically expedient to say. My opponent talked about experimenting with fare free busing and how the ridership increased. I'm not surprised if buses are free, people are going to take the bus more so often. But at the end of the day, we're not talking about an experiment, we're talking about fare free busing across the entire city. That caused $650 million in revenue loss. When we're talking about freezing the rent, again, there are human incentives that occur after freezing the rent, and while it will provide relief for New Yorkers in the moment, over time, in the long run, the economic realities cannot be ignored. As I've said before, that is housing quality. As I said before, that's welfare misallocation, which is a point I really want to hammer on as well. A lot of New Yorkers are hurting because of the affordability crisis, and because half of the rent stabilized apartments, half of the apartments are rent stabilized, there will be an incentive for those who vote to help their interests. But at the end of the day, it won't help young professionals, those who've just moved in, those who aren't already locked into that system, because of the spillover demand that will occur years after rent freezes happen. When it comes to safe streets, and when it comes to the Department of Community Safety, we've seen that in New York, we have sort of lost the fundamentals when it comes to policing and making sure our city is safe. A more simpler plan than spending millions and millions of more dollars to create this Department of Community Safety, which part of the money that Zohran says he will fund the Department of Community Safety is nebulously from different parts of the government that we deem inefficient. So we don't really have a clear answer on where we're going to get all the funding for the Department of Community Safety. Instead, how about we prosecute criminal recidivists? It's a more simple plan. You don't need more money to spend, and you have safer streets. You don't necessarily need to spend more. The answer is not always to spend more money. A lot of the priorities that we have as New Yorkers can simply be done by, as my opponent Alex have said, shifting towards pragmatic governance instead of having lofty goals and new bureaucracies and departments that will handle things in a more specific and in a way that will enlighten professors and those in academia. When it comes to his grassroots campaign, I'm not arguing that he didn't have a successful campaign, but we have to acknowledge that his campaign didn't come from nothing, right? His campaign is activist organized, and at the very bud of the flower that became the Zohran Mamdani campaign, the DSA and other ideologically backed organizations helped with that grassroots organization. That's volunteering with an ideological purpose, and that we would be remiss to ignore that. Again, I've talked about the Common Corridor and the specific neighborhoods in which we've seen higher turnout for Mamdani, and I think we can't ignore that either. Again, it reflects a simple truism that more ideologically driven people will turn out in primaries. The only exception is that in New York City, there is no opposition party. There is no general election where political competitors will moderate their voice for the rest of their constituents. That's what I have to say to rebut. Thank you.
Very much, Daniel. Alex, your 5 minutes rebuttal.
So first, I do just want to address the demographic point. And you're right. In gentrified neighborhoods such as Bushwick or Williamsburg or Ridgewood, Zohran did quite well. But he also did well in many other neighborhoods that I mentioned before. He did well in Harlem. He did well in Flushing. He did well in Staten Island. 470,000 people voted for Zohran. So the idea that his votes only came from these gentrified neighborhoods, the idea that these neighborhoods that in the Commie Corridor are what alone carried him to victory, well, there's just not a mathematical argument for that. Zohran won because he was able to build coalitions between, yes, people who are younger, who are more ideologically left, but also older people, people of different religions, of different cultures, of different races, and yes, of different ideologies. But speaking of ideology, Zohran's campaign was very ideologically driven. Yes, but that does not make it radical. All politics in our society is ideologically driven. Ideology and politics are synonymous. People who voted for Andrew Cuomo were ideologically driven. People who will vote for Curtis Sliwa were ideologically driven. Are they radical? Capitalism is an ideology that currently governs our society. Is that a radical ideology? And I also want to address the point of pragmatism. Everybody agrees that there is a housing crisis, that there is a safety crisis. That is not something that anybody is contending. But Zohran is offering change. He is offering real solutions to these problems. Under his proposal, 2 million people who are struggling with rent will have it frozen. People who are breaking the bank to ride the bus will not have to do that anymore. So how is trying to fix a problem that everybody agrees is a problem, how is that radical? What would be radical, what would be unpragmatic, is doing nothing. It's simply saying that we can't try anything else and just that we have to accept what we have. People voted for Zohran because no other candidate in the race offered any type of comparable or comprehensive, or to be frank, good solutions. That's not radical. And finally, what we continue to see is a cycle in New York City. We see this cycle where why are neighborhoods gentrifying? Because there's a lack of affordable housing. Why is the MTA losing money? Because people are moving out of the city. So we have people like Zohran who say, let's build more affordable housing. Let's make New York more affordable so people can stay in this city. And then his opponents will say, well, no, that's too radical. We can't do that. Right? I don't think that wanting change, wanting a better city is radical. Because by that logic, everyone here is a radical.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Daniel. All right, folks, at this point, we'll open up the Q&A section of our debate, and we'll start it off with the two debaters. I'll invite you, Alex and Daniel, to ask each other a question. Then I have some questions for both of you. And please, while they ask their questions, prepare your own. And I'll be walking around the auditorium and handing you this mic to ask yours. So think about it, formulate the syntax, the grammar, and be ready for your question. And I'll open it up for you guys, whoever wants to start first.
So one of the questions I have for you is that you talk about how like it's not really an economic question when it comes to, for example, like red civilization and whatnot. My question to you is, what's in it for those who aren't in rent stabilized apartments? We know that they're hurting as much as those who are in rent stabilized apartments. And if anything, because of the market distortions, those in unregulated apartments will feel a market effect from the price disparity in rent stabilized apartments if we were to freeze the rent.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So I do just first want to start by saying that freezing the rent is not the only part of Zohran's housing platform. It's definitely a big part of it, but he also has called for regulating bad landlords, for holding them accountable, for making sure that they're paying their fines. He said that he will build 2 million units of affordable housing. So there's actually a lot for people who are not living in rent-stabilized apartments. But I think that his housing ideas are based in the idea that housing is a human right, which is not a radical idea. Nobody wants to live in an unregulated apartment. That's an inherently exploitative situation. Nobody wants to be giving 50% of their income to rent. And I think that when we have a mayor who has the idea that everybody should have housing, that housing should not be a luxury, I think that that is the start for creating actual solutions to these issues.
Would you like to ask a question?
Yes. So we both agree that there's a lot of problems in New York City, but Zohran, you have argued that Zohran's ideas are radical. So my question to you would be, what would be a not radical solution to issues like the affordability crisis, to issues like transit, or to grocery affordability?
First, I want to say that at least the 3 parts of Mamdani's political platform, I believe, are the most radical. Again, there are elements in Mamdani's platform that I believe are a net benefit to the city. I believe that whatever policies that New York City decide to take on, for example, when it comes to rent stabilization, I think a better solution would not be the freeze or rent, to not cause market distortions, to like Mamdani says, rezone, which is one thing I do agree with Mamdani on, and to build more affordable units. But all these solutions will start to bear itself over the long run. If anything, I think that we should lower rent stabilization and allow prices to actually reflect the market. And over the long run, when you lower rent stabilization, when you build more affordable units or build more in New York City, then the supply side will be increased over the long run at least, and on the demand side, we won't have those distortions where those who need housing and are in the unregulated apartments are able to obtain that without breaking the bank.
Comment, or I can ask my question, Alex. Yes, quick comment.
I'll just say quickly, I think it was Karl Marx who said, in the long run, we're all dead. I don't think that offering solutions that may or may not come in the future in the long run is a very pragmatic idea. That's not how people vote. I think people need solutions now.
Quick comment, and then I'll
Well,
go.
one of the bedrock, the problem is that yes, you want a solution now, but the problem is that for those who will continue to live in a city for the long run, no matter who it is, they will then feel the after effects. I mean, one of the biggest rebuttals to what you just said is the huge amount of cash stimulus that we printed during the pandemic and receiving a 20% inflation, dealing with 20% inflation over the years after, right? Again, I'm not saying that we can't have a better New York City. I'm not saying that solutions are impossible, but a little bit of discernment and prudence would go to show that when you take on these emergency measures, which I believe rent stabilization is one of them, like cash stimulus during COVID, they will have after effects that will affect the very people that were benefiting from the emergency solution before.
All right, keep these thoughts going, and I'll start with some of my questions. Please raise your hands. We will open it up in a second. I'll just ask my moderator's prerogative questions. I want to engage with a slightly different angle here about the concept of radicalism with this specific campaign. So the question for you, Alex, Mamdani bragged about how his producer-director mother would only cast white actors as waiters and waitresses in her productions. And he said it in a very casual, almost braggadocious way. He also, in his political program, he writes that he wants to shift the tax burden to richer and whiter neighborhoods in New York City. So in this current political moment that we're living in, where there seems to be a broad exhaustion with this overly racialized language, does that not represent a radical ideology, a radical rhetoric from the Mamdani campaign?
Well, I believe the comment about his mother's videos or his mother's films was made before he was running for mayor. But regarding the tax burden, I don't think that's a very radical idea. I think that it is very well documented and very well understood in New York City that people in wealthier and people in whiter neighborhoods do have disproportionate resources, do have disproportionate incomes, and the idea that they should have to pay more of a fair share so that everybody benefits, that's not a very radical idea.
Comment from you, Daniel?
When you look at the situation with those in wealthier neighborhoods paying less property taxes than those in other neighborhoods, when you're looking at it through an ideological lens, a racialist lens, where white people are the oppressor and then other minority groups are the oppressed, then a sentence like that within your platform is like breathing air. It's just like oxygen. But like what you said, Hagma, is true, that there is an exhaustion when it comes to the over-racialization in American politics. That the descriptive of wider neighborhoods was completely unnecessary. What we know is that wealthier areas, particularly in Manhattan, pay less in property taxes than in poor neighborhoods, and that's a function of those wealthier people having more political connections in New York. That's a better way to take on the issue rather than making it racial.
Thank you both. Quick question for you, Daniel. So a lot of the language in the discussion about Mamdani specifically, I've noticed that there's an angle that is attacking his radicalism in a negative way, saying that he's not radical. So the idea that came to mind is that he, in one of his proclamations, I think in an interview with Mehdi Hassan, he proclaimed that if Bibi Netanyahu comes to New York City, that he's going to command the NYPD to arrest him, to arrest Bibi Netanyahu. Now, someone like Zohran Mamdani clearly knows that he does not have jurisdiction to arrest a head of state, nor are we signatories to the International Criminal Court, nor, of course, he also knows that there's something called diplomatic immunity. So why would he, what would you say to the argument that Mamdani, a lot of his rhetoric that seemed radical is nothing more than a grifting yip-yap that is just, that he's sounding off to try and assuage a certain part of the Democratic, the leftist electorate in New York City, and trying to appear more radical than he is, and that when he comes into office, he's clearly going to shift. Already he's taking pictures with Richie Torres, who's like the #1 AIPAC recipient in New York City. So what do you say to that critique that he's not really radical? He has a veneer of radicalism, but in reality his campaign will moderate quite a bit if he's elected.
I think that's a good question to pose. I've thought about it myself a lot. I think many of Mamdani's proposals, or what you said, especially with arresting Bibi Netanyahu, wow, I'm like tripping over my words. Ultimately, I would say this. I think that the fact that Mamdani is still making claims like that, even though we know realistically it's never going to happen, is because if you want to know who a campaign serves, you have to look at the heart. You have to look at what rhetoric is being espoused, who its target is, where volunteering starts when a campaign, starts off the ground, and obviously its most ardent supporters during political primaries. And I've said throughout the night that the volunteering base is ideologically driven towards the left, unapologetically socialist. I've talked about some of the neighborhood demographics of those of its most ardent supporters. And so the problem arises where you're in a place like New York City, where again, there's no opposition party. The way our government is set up is different from the federal government, for example. So there's less of a separation of powers. The mayor has a more like strong arm, I would say, power over the city council. But if we have a mayor and a city council in agreement, there is no reason to moderate, right? Because all of the levels of government, at least in New York City, are properly aligned. So yes, while your question has a grain of truth to it, and I've thought about it myself, I'm sure we all have, ultimately the levers of power in New York City allows for those with the most radical perspectives out of us to pass their laws and pursue their agenda without any opposition.
Thank you. A quick comment on the same question, and then we will open it up for questions from the audience. And then for those who are watching online, please also type in your questions in the comment section. Please, Alex.
So Zohran has been a supporter of Palestinian rights since he was in college. This is not a position that he adopted when he was running for mayor. But multiple countries have made clear that Benjamin Netanyahu is not welcome in their country. And that is because Benjamin Netanyahu is facilitating a genocide and he is a war criminal. And it is not radical to say that people who facilitate genocides are not welcome in New York City.
I'd like to respond to that.
Please, you do so, and I'll open it up.
I want to say something really quick. I don't purport to be an expert on foreign policy. As a 21-year-old, there's only so much I can think about and write about. But I remember during the primary debate when the mayoral candidates were talking about where they were going to visit first. And Zohran Mamdani was the only one to say in New York City, which is the correct answer in my opinion. The problem is, how do you reconcile that quasi, like a New York first like position where I'm going to stay here in New York City with statements like that, with the fact that you won't condemn the phrase globalizing intifada, because globalizing it means localizing it. And we know that Brad Lander already let Israel bonds mature and didn't reinvest in them. So ultimately, I don't have much of an expert opinion to talk about foreign policy, but at least as a discernible observer, a New Yorker, I find those two things hard to reconcile.
My lovely fiance will walk around and give the mic to people. Gene,
Question
take it
for
away.
the gentleman in support of Mamdani. As a practical matter, is the Mamdani campaign concerned about whether whether Governor Hochul will give the green light to what I gather are tax increases on millionaires that the Mamdani campaign says are essential to being able to afford his program? Hochul has commented a few days after she heard about it that that millionaires do have the opportunity to move out of the city and that it might not raise a whole lot. Is there just a practical problem of tension? She seemed to, she said she supports him even though they have differences. Can you address the affordability issue?
Well, I can't speak to if the campaign is concerned about something or not, but it's very clear. Well, I think that Kathy Hochul endorsed Zohran because she knows how popular she is. She knows that his ideas are supported by a wide swath of New Yorkers. She knows that taxing millionaires and billionaires is a very popular and not a radical idea. So I really think that she is feeling the heat of the movement that Zohran built, and that she is facing a really tough re-election. And if she wants to be able to continue getting votes, she is going to have to deliver on some of these very popular ideas.
Yeah, I was going to say that Hochul's endorsement of Zohran Mamdani is more so because the Democratic Party has failed to have a response to populist rightism rather than an actual endorsement of Mamdani's policies. And all you need to know is how long it took Hochul and a lot of leaders in the Democratic Party to do so. And during that time, the water continued to boil, and no alternate policy vision for the Democratic Party has arisen, and so Hochul is now in a defensive position to do so. That doesn't necessarily translate into actual political capital in Albany, however, in my opinion.
All right, next question, please.
Hi, I have a question for Alex, but feel free to comment too. You said two things. You said that New York is the richest city in the world, in the richest country, and then you also said that capitalism has been the dominant ideology. How do you reconcile those two things? How do you feel like capitalism has not led to New York being the richest city in the world, and therefore we should continue to do it?
Well, the question is who is rich? Who has the money? There's money in New York City. There's more money than anywhere else in New York City. That's not contested. But who has it? It's the wealthy millionaire and billionaire class. It's the 1%. And to say that that money should be redistributed so that nobody is struggling to pay their rent, so that nobody is struggling to afford their groceries, that's not a radical idea.
Comment from you, Daniel.
Well, I would say that, again, you really can't reconcile the two, right? Because capitalism has really made New York City what it is as the key financial metropolis in the country, if not the world. Nobody's arguing that citizens should have a good standard of life, that they should be able to afford groceries and whatnot. But I think it's important to note that New York City is one of the most heavily regulated, places in the United States. And I think we should direct the question not from inequity and capitalism to rather how much government has impacted our lives and made housing, for example, much, much worse in New York City. Because rent stabilization and freezing the rent, they're not new ideas. New York City has been leading the charge when it comes to policies like that in the nation. The real new idea should be to reverse what we've been doing lately.
Next question.
I think when we consider whether Zohran's program is radical, it behooves us to weigh the issues based on how plausibly Zohran can influence them, right? And given the prior question about the issue of Hochul funding Zohran's socialism, a very likely scenario where Zohran pleads with Hochul to fund his socialism, and she says, no, I'm not going to raise taxes to fund your socialism, and then we don't have socialism. What's eminent is that Zohran does have much more direct executive power over law enforcement. And actually, a gentleman representing the lack of radicalism on Zohran's campaign is the only one who really alluded significantly to Zohran's law enforcement policy, which I think is preeminent on the minds of people who are most concerned about his mayoralty, and also seems to be the area where he has the most direct influence. So I suppose my question is twofold. First of all, why has Zohran's law enforcement policy been so neglected heretofore in the debate? And secondly, is it not radical to suppose that depriving resources from armed officers of the law with the power to detain and incarcerate violent crackheads is in order to give social workers the opportunity to diffuse particular situations with these individuals who are perennial causers of distress? Is that not a radical program in itself? And is that actually not the most eminent and plausibly efficacious concern with Zohran's platform?
To Alex, I believe.
Well, to the first part regarding Hochul, I don't think that his program will be achieved because he pleads with Hochul. It will be because the movement that he built fights for it and makes clear that if people are not going to support these very radical ideas, people will come out to oppose their election campaigns in the same force that they came out to elect Zohran. And regarding public safety, I think that it has been a very attractive platform of his because the approach that we have had has not been effective. I don't think that people feel safer. Having more police officers in the subway has not made people feel safer because it's not the right solution to the issue. Again, I don't think that it is very radical to say that we should have a Department of Community Safety. I don't think it's very radical to say that we should have trained mental health professionals respond to people in mental distress.
Comment from you, Daniel?
I think there's enough plausible deniability within Mamdani's campaign to say that he's not directly going to defund the police, but based on his prior comments and some of the vagueness in what I've read in his campaign alludes to. First off, I will say there's a reason why I didn't really mention the Department of Community Safety. It's because I believe that in terms of the financial outlook, I wanted to strictly stay by the book and really talk about straight from Zohran's page and platform page and talk about that. In the Department of Community Safety, I have to talk about Zohran's overall ideology when it comes to that. We know that in 2020 he called for defunding the police. We know that not too long ago he called for disbanding the SRG, the Strategic Response Group. And we know that in his platform, when creating the Department of Community Safety, half of, or at least some of the funding that would go, some of the funding that would go into creating the Department of Community Safety will be taken from parts of the bureaucracy that are inefficient. Is the Strategic Response Group inefficient? These are questions that we need to ask, and really we can only go off of his previous statement that I personally don't think he's evolved from in 5 years to get the answer.
Thank you. Next question.
Hey, thanks to you both for coming out here and sharing your ideas. I have a question that relates, I think, more to the affordability crisis, which has been at the center, I think, of a lot of Zohran success. I think often, when we talk about issues about affordability, we tend to focus, rightfully so, on those who I think are most economically disenfranchised from our system. But I think a recurrent theme that you've heard coming up both in the populist right and the progressive left is sort of this idea that the rich keep getting richer and everyone else is falling behind. And I think a big part of that ties into the eroding of the middle class. And so I guess something that I'm thinking about, as a young New Yorker who's trying to, establish myself in the city, is like it's harder to even make like what I think once was considered a very healthy income like last, and really take you like to a place where you can get ahead in the city, right? And so I guess this is a question for both of you. How do you think that Zohran's policies, like within your respective positions, would either help or hurt the development of a healthy middle class in the city?
When it comes to affordability, I think first we should go big. Are we going to blame capitalism that has allowed our country and our city to flourish so much? Our city is literally the symbolism of capitalism itself, a system that has lifted billions out of poverty, increased the standard of living for those in America and beyond. Are we going to blame the intervening systems that have allowed regulation, that has allowed government to become an active player within the economy, within capitalism, and sort of allow those who already have to lobby the government to get more? And once you have the answer to that question, everything else becomes more simple. When it comes to city-owned grocery stores, why would we give government more power into a market where it can benefit players who lobby for and want to run those city-owned grocery stores? Why would we double down on rent stabilization to have distorted markets to the point where if you're a longtime New Yorker, you're a wealthy New Yorker actually, all you have to do is grandfather you're grandfathered into the system, and as long as you get your child on the lease, then you're going to have a rent-stabilized apartment as well, creating generational wealth and locking out new New Yorkers. So that's the perspective I take when answering the question.
Alex, same question.
Yeah, so the economic problems facing this city impact everybody who's not in the wealthy 1%. Because at the end of the day, expenses are rising, but wages are not. And what has made Zohran's platform so popular is that it is universal. Everybody will benefit from cheaper groceries. Everybody will benefit from affordable housing, right? And just an example, right? My opponent Daniel said that through having more rent-stabilized apartments, that creates generational wealth. Well, that is how we build the middle class, right? Being able to have parents pass this on to their children, being able to have younger people have less concerns. So I think that Zohran's program, by it being universal, by it being something that will benefit everybody who's not a millionaire or billionaire, will help build the middle class.
All right, next question.
Hi, I'm from the American Communist Party. Historically, the left wing has denoted someone's position with respect to the mainstream status quo. Today, the status quo is downstream from American political economy, which is the post-Bretton Woods system, allowing the US dollar as the currency hegemon to maintain debtor status after severing the gold standard, and the recycling of US dollars attained through balance of payments surpluses back into US Treasury bills. So this is a question to you, Alex. Repeatedly in your opening statement, you maintained the idea that spreading around the wealth was an admirable tenet of Zohran's policies. How is spreading the wealth attained through imperialism a left-wing position?
I think that wealth is attained through the surplus labor of working class people. People like Howard Schultz, or the CEO of Starbucks or other companies, they became wealthy because working class people worked for them, right? It is people who make the products, right? Starbucks has money because of the baristas who make the drinks. Grocery stores have money because of the workers in the store. So I don't think it's radical to say that people who create the wealth that makes the city rich, that makes people rich, it's not radical to say that they should have control over it and that it should come back to their pockets.
Daniel, a comment?
I would have to disagree with that. Wealth is not created. First, wealth is not zero sum. Over a long enough time frame, wealth continuously increases for everybody. That's the same thing with jobs and whatnot. Wealth is created by creating something in the market that people want, right? That's where wealth is. That's where wealth comes from. And so when you're a barista, or if you're working, let's say, just a minimum wage job, nobody's saying that you're not working hard. Nobody's saying that you don't deserve to have a living you should have a good standard of living, but you don't deserve to become wealthy because you're not putting something out into the market that creates a demand that improves people's lives. That's really all I wanted to say about that.
Thank you. Another one?
Thank you, Young Voices, for putting this on. It's great. Thank you, debaters. My question is for Alex. Alex, Daniel is arguing that Zohran's policies are too radical, and yet he was willing to concede some areas where he thinks they are not too radical, giving small businesses a line to navigate regulation, building more housing supply, changing zoning. Are you willing to admit some areas of Zohran's program in the spirit of equity that are too radical for you?
Well, I think it depends on how you define radical, right? If you define radical as a departure from what we're doing now, then sure, Zohran is offering a very different program. But if you define radical as in something that is inattainable or not practical or some type of fantasy, then no, I don't think that anything would fall under that category. Nothing in his platform now, no.
Daniel, same question?
Well, I guess I answered the question over the course of the debate. But if I'll say this, I think that with everyday New Yorkers, there are definitely things in Zohran's political platform that we could say, you know what, I could get behind this, or this doesn't seem like a good idea. My problem is that there's certain, and you sort of gotten that vibe from what from my opening statement. Some of them are infeasible, and some of them you really have to look at the financial outlook of the city before really making these grandiose claims that you can $100 billion to housing, another $80 billion to renovate NYCHA, another billions and billions of dollars to create a Department of Community Safety, where we already have the formula, we already understand what creates wealth, we already understand what makes New York safer. We had a period of increased safety in New York City. So you don't need to create these new departments and create jobs for your nonprofit buddies. Just return back to the basics. And that's the main argument that I've been trying to make, at least.
Thank you. We have one more question here with the red hat, and then we have a question from the Bronx Center for Science and Mathematics High School, who've brought some of their students to participate in this debate. So after this one, with the red hat, we'll take a question from you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. What do you say to the people concerned that Mamzeri is connected with violent protest movements?
For you, what is your response to the allegation that some believe Mamdani is connected to? You said once more?
Violent protest movements, for example, like his support back in 2020 of BLM, and also his support last year of the pro-Palestine protests, and all of those were, of course, not very orderly, to say the least. So the concern is on the part of some people that there will be more social unrest if he wins.
Thank you.
In my experience, the people who are most radical, the most violent at protests are the SRG, the NYPD. They're the ones who are creating violence. They were the ones who bashed the heads in of protesters at the last encampment, and Zohran wants to abolish them. So I think under Zohran, protests will become much more safe.
Comment from you, Daniel?
That gives credence to another big concern that a lot of New Yorkers have, which is Zohran's past comments and past activities. And I think it's very prudent, or I think it would be prudent for New Yorkers to think about, again, like his involvement at, I believe he was at, was he at Schumer's house? I can't recall right now, but he's been at protests before. And again, with his statements about disbanding or defunding the NYPD, among other statements, those are statements worth concerning, that we should be concerned about. And again, the reason why I'm concerned about it is not because some of them, like we discussed earlier, give some red meat to the most ardent supporters. My concern is that we're having an honor system here. We're essentially trusting Zohran in his campaign, if elected mayor, not to implement his most radical positions, which I don't have much faith in that, really.
All right, for the question from the Bronx Center for Science and Mathematics High School. Thank you for coming. Please take it away.
Hi, there's a question for Alex, although Daniel, you can feel free to comment also. So when Mamdani uses rhetoric such as richer and whiter neighborhoods when speaking of who his taxes are presumably going to attack or focus on, does this not paint them as a polarizing figure? In a political climate where racial tensions are as high as ever, does his rhetoric not make Mamdani a figure writing these racial tensions, making an enemy, and if he's writing these racial tensions, does he not make an us versus them mentality when he's speaking to his voters? And if so, does this not make him radical?
So to answer that question, I would look at the election results. Zohran won neighborhoods that are majority white, such as Bay Ridge, Dyker Heights, Bensonhurst. He won places like Harlem and Bed-Stuy and Crown Heights. Zohran won in neighborhoods that have people of all races, of all demographics. He had very broad appeal. So if Zohran was a polarizing figure, if he was increasing racial tensions, I think that the results would look very different.
Okay, a comment from you, Daniel, and then I think we'll take a couple more. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say this. Again, if you look at the world through a racial lens off rip, then again, it doesn't seem radical to you because that is the world that's the way you see the world. But in reality, most Americans, most New Yorkers, just subscribe to a more colorblind ethos. You know, that I will judge you by the content of your character and not by the color of your skin. And so, to regular New Yorkers, yes, it is concerning in a way where, again, like I said before, because this a version of this question was asked before, there was no need to add the fact that those neighborhoods are white, right? You can add the fact that these wealthier neighbors lobbied the government in order to pay less property taxes. You can make the argument that they're wealthier because that's the primary contention at play here. White has nothing to do with it. If a black wealthy Manhattanite has a property, they are in their best interest, because we're humans and there are incentive structures, to not pay property taxes, to pay less property taxes. So that's my answer to your question, at least.
All right, quick comment, Alex, and then, oh no, you already answered. Okay, we'll take another question.
Hi, Daniel. Earlier you said that you agreed with Mamdani during the debate in New York, where all the other candidates, all of them, were falling over themselves to say, "I'll go to Israel." And one of them even said, "I'll make my 6th trip to Ukraine and my 5th trip to Israel." Is it not all those other candidates, that are the ones that have the radical position?
In terms of that, yeah, I would say more so it's strange rather than radical. I was sitting there watching the debate, and I expected them to say like Greenpoint or Prospect Heights or something, and you're the mayor of a city, like you don't need to leave the country. That's not your constituency. So again, yes, I agree with Mamdani on the fact that he would stay in New York. But again, when it's easy to say that when the lights are shining and you're in front of millions of New Yorkers, many of whom are busy and have jobs to do, it's way harder to get past someone like us, for example, who are more political junkies than the average American, and we have the receipts, and we know that Brad Lander, who's an ally of Mamdani, let Jewish bonds mature and didn't reinvest them. Again, I don't really care if it's Jewish bonds or whatever bonds they may be. Leave the bonds alone, right? So I think when you look at that, when you look at his refusal to condemn the phrase globalized and intifada, again, I'm not a foreign policy expert, but what I could tell you is that can you just leave New York alone when it comes to that? Like Zohran has said, like many of us have said, feel there are much bigger issues that affect New Yorkers only, affordability, safety, etc., and we should focus on those only. So while, to answer the question more directly, yes, while it was really strange that the other mayoral candidates said they would go to Israel first, I also find it strange that Mamdani, essentially, in my opinion, lied when looking at his previous record on and what his allies have done when it comes to Israel-Palestine.
All right, Alex, a quick comment on the same question.
Yeah, it's not radical to not want our bonds to go fund the genocide. I think that if you ask any New Yorker on the street, they will agree with that.
Okay, we'll take a couple more, and as you get the last question, we have a bunch of questions here online. A question for Daniel. If you don't believe in rent-stabilized apartments being common, how do you explain increased disparity in wealth and increased homelessness here, since rent stabilization has become rarer and rarer? And we have a bunch of others here, but once Daniel quickly addresses that one, we'll take a couple more, and we'll take it from there. Daniel?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry about that.
If you don't believe in rent-stabilized apartments being common, how do you explain increased disparity in wealth and increased homelessness here in New York City, since rent stabilization has become rarer and rarer?
Well, half of New York City's apartments are rent stabilized. So the idea that rent stabilized apartments are rare, I think, is just plainly wrong. The problem of rent stabilized apartments, again, is the market distortion that it has on unregulated apartments. I'm sorry, like that's just the plain fact. And when we look at other cities like Austin, Texas, for example, that have the plus size of Zohran's housing agenda, where it's build, 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 but also have strict regulations against rent stabilization, we see that the cost of living is way less in those areas. And another point when it comes to rent stabilization, turnover in rent stabilized apartments aren't high, right? Tenants live in, the vacancy rate for rent stabilized apartments is less than 1%. So there aren't any available. And as I've said a few times during this debate, the tenants there have near perpetual rights, like up to generational, and there's no means tested factor within rent stabilized apartments. So whether you're wealthier or lower income, there's a slight welfare misallocation that happens where one person may end up sleeping in the streets because somebody who has a rent-stabilized apartment on the Upper West Side decided to keep that apartment as their vacation home. We all know the stereotype. Let's pretend it doesn't exist.
Okay, a quick comment from you, Alex, and then we'll take a couple of fast questions that hopefully you'll address in your closing statements because we are running out of time. So a quick comment from you, Alex.
Yeah, the housing crisis is not caused by rent-stabilized apartments. The housing crisis is caused by a lack of affordable housing, which is what happens when you let the market dictate a human right and a human need, such as housing. So to say, rent-stabilized apartments are one of the few paths to staying in New York, because you can actually afford your rent. So saying that we should build more of this thing that helps millions of New Yorkers, that's not radical. Saying that we should go after bad landlords, that's not radical. That is actual solutions to the problems at hand.
Okay, thank you both. Now we'll
Yeah.
take a bunch of questions. We'll take one here.
Daniel,
Okay, yep.
This question starts with you. You recently mentioned that we want potentially our mayoral candidate to take a colorblind approach, which I want to ask, how is that not radical in the most diverse city in the country or in the world? Particularly at a time when at the federal level, we're having ICE raids that are specific on the basis of color, on the basis of someone potentially looking like they have a low-wage job, or they look Spanish, or like they don't belong here. Is it not prudent for the mayor of one of the most diverse cities to take an approach that actually acknowledges color in a city that carries so many different types of people?
Thank you, thank you. Please take notes so you can ideally address these questions in your closing remarks. We have one more here.
Hi, thank you. So my question is about the city-owned grocery stores. So the profit margins for grocery stores in New York City and in the nation are very, very thin. How will New York City's government, which cannot operate as leanly as private companies due to regulations, help save New Yorkers money on groceries? And further, won't city-run groceries uniquely harm the thousands of immigrant family-owned businesses, corner stores, and bodegas that serve most of the city's poorest food neighbors, food deserts?
All right, thank you. We have one more here with the gentleman with the suit. Maggie, please. He's been raising his hand for a while.
Thank you very much. It's just a jacket, not a suit. But on the housing issue, if you freeze rents for 2 million New Yorkers, that's going to knock tens of billions of dollars off the value of those buildings, which might have impacts to the stability of banks. But isn't that radical, causing tens of billions of dollars of value to just go poof? And then the follow-up is, if you're doing this to landlords, who's going to be willing to put up brand new apartments?
All right, thank you for these highly engaging questions. I hope the two debaters have taken ample notes. And with that, Daniel, you have your 5 minutes for your closing remarks. Try to do so, yes. And as a reminder, the questions were one about color blindness and ICE targeting those of a diverse background. And the third question was about housing issues and freezing the rent and how that affects values. And the second question, I hope you took notes about.
First, I want to talk about the color blindness question, because I feel as though that question is really targeted towards, or geared towards me. I think the city-owned grocery stores and the landlords, at least by the way they were phrased, are for Alex more so than me. When it comes to color blindness, nobody's saying that when it's actually prudent to talk about color, then we should. For example, with charter schools disproportionately positively affect Black and Hispanic New Yorkers in underserved communities, and I've written extensively about how charter schools in New York City, at least, is good for Black New York and Black America and whatnot. The problem is, when it comes to that statement, the question that we heard, race is immaterial to that conversation unless your worldview holds that white people are always the oppressor and those who are not are always in the oppressed category. Sometimes it's just about money. Sometimes it's about lobbying. Sometimes it's just about power. And power can be wielded. I know that it's fashionable to think that power can be disproportionately wielded by one group just because they exist, but that's not the case. Anybody with power seeks to maintain that power. And so when it comes to immigration, for example, when it comes to immigration, I think that you can have color is not the first priority when it comes to immigration. It's the how it will end up affecting the job market, the housing market, whether we have vetted people who have crossed into the United States, into New York City. New York City has spent $5 billion on the migrant crisis, and those migrants, once we finish accommodating them, eventually they will then compete with housing, not in the Upper West Side, but in Brownsville. They'll end up competing for jobs, not the finance bros, not the communications major girly who just graduated. They're going to be competing for construction workers that are already in the decline in New York City. That's what we should focus on when it comes to immigration, not race. Race makes it reductive. As for my conclusion, I don't know how much time I have left. I kind of rambled on there, but as for my conclusion, I'll say this. I'm forever bound to the city. I've gotten my driver's license late, just like everybody else who've grown up here. My parents immigrated here, have staked their lives here, worked hard to raise me and my brothers. As a young adult, I don't claim to know everything in the world, and I love this city so much I would never leave it. I will generally defer to the policy preferences of my community, which is New York. But for years, those preferences have been minute. They've been marginal, higher taxes, right? Different programs for children and whatnot. And that's fine, ultimately because my love for New York City trumps all. Way more than politics, way more than anything. But Zohran Mamdani's policy platform, I'm like super thirsty. His policy platform, at least to me, is not just about minor preferences. It's not about marginally increasing the tax rate, although Alex would disagree with me on that. It's not about, again, the minor preferences that we're usually accustomed to in New York politics and American politics. It's consequential. Radical in ways that go beyond what the mainstream New Yorker would espouse when it comes, at least ideologically, sentiments of defunding the police, sentiments of abolishing prisons, sentiments of this idea that violence is a social construct created by the white man to incarcerate all black New Yorkers and whatnot. I may be simplifying. I don't want to straw man your guys' arguments because I'm sure there's so many people who are smarter than me who've come up with arguments like so. But at least to me, those arguments are illiberal, right? New York City has been founded, built, and strengthened on ideas of on capitalism, on freedom of expression, on these classically liberal ideas that unfortunately I think Zohran Mamdani is opposed to. And so it's my duty, even though I'm just a college student, in my capacity, in the best way I can, stand up against those who are in opposition to liberal beliefs. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Alex, your 5-minute closing remarks. Please take it away.
So to answer some of the questions that have been said before I get into my closing remarks, I agree. We should not have a colorblind mayor, right? This is a time when the federal government is targeting and kidnapping people of color. Having a colorblind mayor would be totally irresponsible. Regarding the grocery stores, I think that the economic theory behind it is pretty sound. If you can have grocery stores or any business that does not have a profit incentive and has lower overhead by being does not have to pay rent, you can get lower prices. And I believe that the program that he put forward would have one grocery store in every borough, right? This would not fundamentally change the way that we buy our groceries. And then regarding the question about housing, I believe his platform said that the city would build this housing. So it would, again, be something done by the government, done by union labor, and it would not be something that landlords would have to take the burden of building. But to get into my closing statement, there's a phrase in the world of organizing that says, always be organizing. So I would be a bad socialist organizer if I did not make an ask of you all. If you agreed with what I said today, if you agree with Zohran, if you want to join the fight for a better world, join DSA, dsausa.org, right? Let's grow DSA even bigger than it already has. But I want everyone to close their eyes and think about a world that has implemented Zohran's agenda. You would wake up in an apartment like you do now, but one that you can afford. You would take your kid to a child care center, just like you do now, but one that is not breaking the bank. You would get on a bus, just like you do now, but instead of it being really slow, instead of you having to wait in line, it would be fast and free. On your way home from work, you would stop at a grocery store, but instead of those prices breaking the bank, you would be able to actually afford them. This is not some radical fantasy. Millions of people in America and the world live this as a reality. So is it really so radical that we can too in New York City? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Alex. Thank you, Daniel, for your closing remarks. With that, we've concluded our debate. So we will ask you once more to whip out your phones, scan this QR code, and give us your post-debate vote on the resolution. New York mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani's political program is radical by mainstream measure. Consider the arguments that you heard and give us your vote once more. And as you do so, I'll invite my lovely friend here, Gene Epstein, the director of the Soho Forum Debate Society, to come make some announcements.
I can just use this. Yes. Well, I'm proud to claim that Hekmet and Casey have been friends of mine for many years, although I got to know them after I started the Soho Forum in September of 2016. And since September of 2016, we've been doing a debate every single month. We now have more than 100 debates ranging on a whole lot of different issues online at thesohoforum.org. I invite you all to attend a Soho Forum debate. It's very much in structure similar to the one you saw this evening. I myself strongly believe in one versus one debates, mostly because 2 versus 2 leads to too many sound bites, and mostly because oftentimes the pairs are not really coordinated. 1 versus 1, I think, is a better debate, just like this debate was this evening, and we also do Oxford-style voting, just to add a little bit of drama to the evening. Our debates are held mostly at the Sheen Center, run by the Catholic Archdiocese on Bleecker Street, although it so happens that whenever we've had a debate on Israel-Palestine, the Catholic Archdiocese has said that we can't do it under their auspices, so we've actually held those debates in this venue. And of course, I should wish all you Gentiles in the audience a happy Jewish New Year. The year is, I think, 5786. Doesn't it really feel like 5786 rather than just that puny 2025? I commend my friend Hekmet to have the courage, the gall, the chutzpah to run a debate on the night of Rosh Hashanah when he's probably lost a lot of audience who are now worshiping their God in shul on the highest holiday. Well, in October, we're going to do a debate on the legalization of drugs. In November, we're going to do a debate on affirmative action. In December, we're going to do a debate on monopoly and antitrust. And the big thing is that our after parties are very important to us. Mostly our after parties are held in the very large loft apartment that I live in with my wife Asako. She caters them, and it's the second mission of the Soho Forum to build a community. And once again, I commend my friend Hekmet on the terrific job he did and on the lively debate we've had this evening between these two guys, and recognize that whatever happens to the Oxford-style vote, the most important thing is, what did you learn from the debaters? What did you learn from the debater you disagreed with initially or still disagree with? What did you learn from the evening? And of course, that should be partly attributable to discussions you might have afterwards with your friends about this very stimulating debate we just saw. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Gene. Please. Yeah, I'm going to help you. Please find Gene in the reception that we're going to host.
thesohoforum.org. Yeah.
Yes, and we can talk to Gene and talk to the two debaters. We're going to have a reception with wine and some food. It's going to be right here, just downstairs, so stick around. Yeah. All right, let's check on the results of the Oxford South voting, and I hope everyone has had the chance to vote. All right. Okay, so maybe a drum roll is in tow here. We start off with 58.9% of the vote agreeing with the resolution, so agreeing with the proposition with Daniel's side, and 12% disagreeing, and 28% undecided on the resolution. In the post-debate vote, we reached 62% agreeing, so a slight increase for the agree for Daniel's side, but a major increase for the disagree for the opposition, jumping from 12% to 36%, and an undecided vote dropping to 2%. So that means that the opposition wins this debate. Congratulations, Alex, and congratulations to both of you on an excellent debate. And with that, folks, as I said earlier, we have a reception downstairs. The first drink is on Young Voices, so we very much encourage you to go and make use of that voucher. And have an excellent night and talk to the debaters, engage with them further. Thank you all and have a good night.